Game of Thrones premiered on HBO in 2011 and went on to dominate pop culture in the 2010s to a degree that was almost annoying. The show became appointment television in an era when appointment television was supposed to be a thing of the past, and I was right there along with everybody else, watching every episode, wondering who was going to die, looking for hints and connections and clues. Then the series finale aired in 2019 and left a lot of people extremely unhappy. There was a change.org petition to remake the 8th and final season with competent writers that got nearly 2 million signatures. People are still signing to this day. And this was not an online-only thing. In 2019, I overheard complete strangers complain about the ending of Game of Thrones in restaurants and on elevators. The backlash was very real and very strong. There's no one reason why people hated the ending so much, but a lot of Game of Thrones fans would probably agree that the show was at its best in its early seasons when it was sticking very close to the source material, the Song of Ice and Fire books by George R.R. Martin. Things started to get a little shaky in the 5th season when the show had to adapt some of the trickier books in the series, and showrunners David Benioff and Dan Weiss started to cut, combine, and change things. By the end of the run, they had zero source material to work with, since George R.R. Martin has, rather famously, yet to finish writing his saga. Martin told Benioff and Weiss the broad strokes of the ending he was working toward, but he didn't have many details, so they had to connect the dots themselves, and their dot-connecting skills were perhaps not the best. But Game of Thrones got a chance at redemption in 2022 when HBO aired the first season of a new prequel show called House of the Dragon, based on another one of Martin's books, Fire and Blood. And this book was finished, so all the writers had to do was adapt it faithfully, and it should be fine. And that went pretty well for the first season, which was very widely praised. But the second season took a step down in quality. These are IMDb episode ratings plotted on a graph, so you can see it's not just me who thinks that. Again, there was no one reason for this, but I chalk a lot of it up to the writers kind of abandoning what was written in Fire and Blood and sort of doing their own thing. Like, there are important characters on the show who do pretty much the opposite of what they do in the book, and the show has to contort itself around these new choices in a pretty messy way. So at this point, it seems clear that if you are making a new show set in the Game of Thrones universe, and that show is based on a book by George R.R. Martin, it is in your best interest to honor that book if you can. I'm not saying you have to adapt everything word for word. Books and TV are different, stuff will get changed. But if fidelity is an option, why not give it a try? A new Game of Thrones prequel show actually looks like it's taking this advice. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, which will premiere on HBO on January 18th, 2026. Let's dig into the details on this episode of
Sir Duncan the Tall. 4 pages for Sir Duncan.
A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is based on George R.R. Martin's Tales of Duncan Egg novellas. He's written 3 so far, which have been collected in this little compendium. The story is a lot smaller in scale than fans are used to. It's set around 100 years before the events of Game of Thrones, when there are no dragons around. There isn't a war for the throne on, and we don't travel all over the map, checking in on various characters. The first season is based on the first novella, The Hedge Knight, which takes place more or less entirely in one location, at a tournament at Ashford Meadow in the Reach. And while the cast of Game of Thrones was so big that it basically had like 10 main characters at any given time, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms revolves very tightly around 2 people. The brave but naive knight Sir Duncan the Tall, who's hoping he does well enough in the tournament that some lord will be impressed and hire him, and his precocious, stark, raving bald squire Egg. So how do we know that A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is going to stick close to the source material? Well, for starters, the people involved have told us. George R.R. Martin got to see the show ahead of time, and he's been very generous with his praise, writing on his blog that he loved every episode, even in rough cut form, and that the show is as faithful an adaptation as a reasonable man could hope for. And Martin is not the kind of guy who will say something nice about a show just because it's based on one of his books. In fact, after the second season of House of the Dragon aired, he wrote a blog post where he openly complained about how the season 2 premiere changed a key scene from Fire and Blood, and warned about more toxic changes ahead. So if Martin didn't think that A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms was being faithful to his book, he would tell us, and I'm inclined to think he's telling the truth when he says he loves it. Then there's Ira Parker, the showrunner for A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. He talked about working on the show at New York City Comic Con in October.
He made me want to do a good job for him. They say when you're writing that you should not try to please everybody. that you shouldn't write for the audience, that you should pick one person and you should write for them. And this season, season 1, I did that for George, and the fact that he's happy makes me very happy as well, too. He's only been a benefit to this show. He has only been a benefit to me.
So these are good signs, and if you watch the teasers and trailers released so far, it definitely looks like Ira Parker and his team are trying to stick as close to the source material as possible. In terms of aesthetic, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms looks bright and colorful, which fits with the lighthearted tone of the story and is a million miles away from Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, which often look kind of dark and dim. And a ton of the lines from the Knight of the Seven Kingdom trailers are pulled directly from the Hedge Knight. For example,
"What's your name?"
Sir Duncan the Tall.
"Never heard of him."
Do you know every knight in the Seven Kingdoms, then?
"The good ones. Every knight needs a squire, and you look like you need one more than most."
"Sit, my horse."
I'm not a stable boy, my lord.
Not clever enough.
Come out, little knight.
"Falling star brings luck to those who see it."
So the luck is ours alone?
And so, I ask you again, how good a knight are you?
Are there no true knights among you?
Rob me, and I'll hunt you down with dogs.
"You don't have dogs!"
I'll get some.
"Where?"
Oh!
they do add that bark at the end there. But what really caught my attention were a couple of small details about Martin's world that both Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon kind of got wrong that A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is getting right. First up, let's talk hair. The ruling family in Westeros is House Targaryen, whose members are readily identifiable by their impossibly blonde silver-white hair. Daenerys Targaryen has it, her brother Viserys had it, and a ton of people on House of the Dragon have it, including Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen. However, Rhaenyra's sons do not have it, which ends up being an important plot point, since their unforgivable brunetteness is taken as evidence that Rhaenyra's husband, Sir Lyonel Baratheon, isn't actually their father. Which, to be fair, he fully is not.
Do keep trying, Selena. Sooner or later, you may get one who looks like you.
But it is possible for full-blooded Targaryens born within the bounds of marriage to have dark hair. In Fire and Blood, we're told that Princess Rhaenys Targaryen has black hair. Her mother was a dark-haired Baratheon woman, and dark hair is a dominant genetic trait, so there you go. But on House of the Dragon, for some reason, Rhaenys has the standard Targaryen atomic blonde hair. I don't know, maybe they thought it would confuse fans if she didn't have it. It's not, like, a huge deal, but I always wondered why they didn't take the opportunity to have more follicular diversity in the show. If nothing else, it could have saved from the wig budget. In A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, a few Targaryens show up to the tournament at Ashford Meadow. This dude is Aerion Targaryen, and he has the classic Targaryen coloring. He's also a grade A jackass who might be the best villain to terrorize this franchise in a while. I'm looking forward to seeing how people react to him. But Aerion's brother, Daeron the Drunken Targaryen, who brings a kind of sarcastic Tyrion Lannister energy to the story, has sandy brown hair. And his uncle Baelor Targaryen, the sensible one of the family, has dark hair. So we finally have a Game of Thrones show that doesn't bleach every Targaryen blonde just because of their last name. The other thing I noticed has to do with medieval armament. So, gather round, nerds. So all of these shows take place on a huge continent called Westeros, which is sort of forever stuck in medieval times. And when medieval knights went into battle in our world, they didn't just wear armor, they wore helmets. Sometimes big honking great helms that covered their entire heads. Which makes sense, right? If folks are swinging swords at you, you'll want to protect your face. But on Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, more often than not, characters fight with no headgear to speak of. Now, I do get why this happens. We want to see these actors emote, and we can't do that if their faces are covered. Does it make sense that Jon Snow is running around this war zone with nothing protecting his head from flying arrows? No, not really. But I'm willing to suspend my disbelief because I want to see his reactions to what's happening around him. But I also really like that A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is trying to keep things more grounded. Towards the end of The Hedge Knight, Dunk participates in an epic action scene where he wears a big honking great helm that completely covers his face, with only little slits for his eyes. In The Hedge Knight, that becomes a factor in the fight, like what he can see affects what he can do in combat. Not only does this aspect make the jump to TV, it looks like they're doing some really interesting stuff with it. There's a great shot in the trailer where we're behind Dunk as he starts to gallop forward, and then we're seeing things from his POV inside his helmet. Culture Crave called this night vision, which is brilliant, and immediately it's named forever. So maybe they found a way around the problem of losing that personal connection with the character once you cover their face. Maybe if we're inside Dunk's helmet with him, it'll be more immersive than ever. Again, these are pretty small details. It's not like the show would be ruined if all Targaryens had white-hot hair, or if we just kept pretending that helmets didn't exist. But I figure that if the show is willing to stay true to even these small details about Martin's work, it'll probably stay true to everything, which bodes very well. At least until season 2. The first season of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms will run for only 6 episodes, and they're not very long, they're like a half hour each. That sounds pretty short, but The Hedge Knight is a novella. You can read it in a single sitting, and I think that stretching the story out would ruin it, so I think they made the right call here. Plus, HBO is making up for the length by ensuring that we won't have to wait an eternity to watch the second season, which will be based on the second of Martin's Dunk and Egg novellas, The Sworn Sword. You know, over the years, the gaps between new seasons of these tentpole dramas have gotten stupidly long. A new season of Game of Thrones used to come out every year, but House of the Dragon returns every 2 years. Stranger Things has taken multiple 3-year breaks between seasons. It's getting kind of ridiculous, so I'm glad to see that HBO is making efforts to cut down on these long wait times. The Pit is about to return for its second season about a year after the first, and HBO is filming the second season of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms as we speak, before the first even airs, which means it'll probably take about as long to come back. But when it does, can we expect Ira Parker and his team to remain faithful to the source material? I'm probably worrying too much, but I wanted to highlight something a little weird before we wrap this up. Remember that at New York City Comic Con, Parker said that when you're writing, you should pick one person in the audience to write for, and that for the first season of Night of the Seven Kingdoms, he picked George R.R. Martin. Well, in that same interview, he left open the possibility that for season 2, he might pick someone else.
Season 2, we'll see, who gets picked.
Now, obviously, if you're writing for George R.R. Martin, you're going to try and adapt his book faithfully, because that's what's going to make him happy. But if you're writing for someone else, maybe yourself, who knows what you do? The temptation for Hollywood writers to take a book and make it their own seems to be very strong, because it happens a lot. And I don't really understand that instinct, at least not when the source material is this strong. My bet is that A Night of the Seven Kingdoms is going to come out and go over really well with both book fans and complete newbies. The book fans will love it because it sticks close to the text, and the complete newbies will love it because it's a great story. But I think it's going to be a great story because it sticks close to the text. I hope that everyone involved in the show has the wisdom to realize that going forward, and we could have a great little series on our hands. But also, I'm saying all of this before I've seen one episode. Maybe the show will be terrible and I'll be embarrassed. Maybe I'll make a follow-up video apologizing for my stupid opinion. Better go ahead and subscribe just to make sure you don't miss that.